Thanks everyone for being punctual. It is 3 o'clock, but we do have a number of folks logging in here, so just give us another minute or two and we'll get started right away. All right, to be mindful of everyone's time, let's get started. My name is Ryan Tolson. I lead the offshore wind commercial team at Esgian. I do see many regulars. I see some new names here, but first and foremost, thank you all for attending today. But those of you that do not know who Esgian is, we are headquartered in Oslo, Norway, and we offer digital platforms for the ocean industries, operating in three primary segments. That's offshore rigs, shipping, and offshore wind. My focus being 100% offshore wind. We obviously talk offshore wind today. If you haven't already, I do encourage you to follow SGN Offshore Wind on LinkedIn. Sign up for our newsletter to be kept up to date on all future events, news, and our quarterly reports. As most of you already know, each month we do host a short webinar that covers a current and relevant offshore wind topic. We do keep these to 19 minutes, and we do that on purpose. We understand time is precious, and we want to provide you with quality information in a very short period of time. But within SGN Offshore Wind, we do offer a subscription-based digital platform that provides transparency and clarity into the global offshore wind market. We actually just released our new and enhanced platform, which we're extremely excited about. Our clients for this digital platform, they tend to be developers, companies within the supply chain, vessel operators, consultancies, and more. And we're primarily helping them with business development. Where are the future opportunities? Which companies should I be reaching out to? But also competitive and strategic analysis. But in today's discussion, we will highlight the offshore wind trends and opportunities and updates from a few key markets. But I think the best part about these presentations is that all the information that we discuss has been sourced from our Wind Analytics digital platform. Today we have on the line with me two team members. We have Oliver and Casper. And with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Oliver. So Oliver, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, today we're taking a look specifically at lease rounds, what's happening around the world in this particular area of offshore wind, which for us is particularly important in ensuring that the enormous pipeline of projects that we're tracking actually get built, or at least are on their way to getting built. 3 months ago in one of our monthly webinars, we took a quick look around the world. We provided some thoughts on 6 countries that we were looking at, where we were in terms of lease rounds, where we might be heading. This month, we're stepping back a little bit. We're taking a deeper dive into 3-4 countries, all of which we think are key to understanding some of the most important trends that we're seeing at the moment in terms of lease rounds. But let's start by taking a quick run around the world to see what's happened so far in 2024. For those of you who haven't had a look at this yet, the opportunity to see it, this is the new platform that we released recently that Ryan mentioned. And we can take a look on the map around the leasing areas and see what's happened, as I say, in the last couple of months or so, and maybe take a look back into the last year as well. So let's first of all head over to the US, to Canada, head across the Atlantic to North America. For those of you who are not sure what we're looking at here, the white blocks that you can see, and let me bring up the legend for you. The white blocks that you can see are the lease areas. We'll start with that. You can see up here on the far right-hand corner of the map in Canada, we've got the final version, hopefully the final versions of the lease areas that were announced in Nova Scotia in Canada. More pertinent to that shorter term view here, we've got those lease areas that we can see that are currently in a process for Maine offshore the US. For those of you who want to understand it, you can click on any of these and you'll get the full information around those lease areas. So that's the white blocks we're looking at. What I would do here, though, let's focus in a little bit on some of the blue blocks, bring things right up to date for what's going on in the US. So if we just remove the lease areas, we're only left with the projects now. And we zoom in and focus on the overnight news that came out last night, yesterday afternoon in the US. The two blocks that are now no longer lease blocks are now showing as projects in our database that were won, in this instance by Equinor, a bit further up in the more, yes, it's still part of the Central Atlantic, but a lot closer to the existing projects that are under development on the East Coast. And the other block that was announced yesterday, just to show you on the map, what we're looking at was C1, which is this block on the right-hand side there that was won by Dominion, building on the project for coastal Virginia that's under development right now, and also adding, may have not necessarily got a huge amount of press, but last month, Dominion also took on this project here that was previously part of Iberdrola's Kitty Hawk, or Avangrid's Kitty Hawk portfolio. That one on the left there is now known as Coastal Virginia South. So all things considered, a very, very significant portfolio of capacity that's been built out by Dominion there on the East Coast. So those were the two big news stories yesterday in terms of lease rounds. It does feel like we're getting news all the time at the moment, but that was the focus of attention certainly yesterday. If we only go back to last week, the focus of attention very much on Northwest Europe. So we zoom over here, I'll bring the lease areas back into the map. You can see it's an extremely busy, complex map here at the moment. To try and simplify things a little bit, let's go into the filters. And we're focusing in really on what's happening so far this year and for the rest of this year. So we'll just apply that filter very quickly and focus in on some of the more important stories from a leasing perspective that we've seen. A lot of volumes that we've seen in Europe, and Casper will pick up on this, that have actually gone through successfully those processes, particular IJmuiden Ver, Alpha and Beta here. In the Dutch North Sea, but most recently the blocks that we have here still with the rather unimaginative names of N9.1 and 9.2, which were the RWE blocks that were won very, very recently. And here's the new Luxcara block for 1.5 gigawatts to add to their other award from last year. At the moment, we're focused in on what was awarded in 2024. So some very significant activity that we've seen, particularly in Germany and in the Netherlands, some really big volumes that have gone out to developers in those different countries. Not all the activity there, though. If we just zoom around a little bit, we can see we've had some successes. We need to be a little careful with how successful, but certainly some developers getting their hands on positions in the Baltics. And also, if we zoom over here, we can see that we've got the floating project, potentially up to 270 megawatts here off Brittany. And we're still holding out hope for possibly some awards later this year in the Mediterranean and France. So pretty positive story there in terms of the volumes that have changed hands, although it is a little bit more nuanced than that when we get into the details. If we just zoom across all the way to Australia, I think this was something of a surprise. The volumes were always known to be big, but certainly were on the high side for us in terms of our expectations of the awards from this year. We've still got that filter on for 2024 at the moment. You can see a huge number of projects in Gippsland that were awarded, well over 25 gigawatts there. We've got the Newcastle project that was successful, and we're still also potentially expecting the Southern Ocean, South Australia lease area to be announced as well, to finish this year as well, to be awarded this year. So a huge amount of volumes that we have seen, and also a huge amount still on the market as well for this year. So let's dive into a little bit more detail, having played around with the map and shown you where we are exactly. If we go back to the slides and get into what we're seeing in more details. The idea now is that I will look at the US and at Taiwan, and then I'll hand things over to Casper. He's going to take a look at what's happening in Europe and pull together some of the possible wider implications that we see in other countries, other areas as jurisdictions as well. So having said that, there's been a lot of activity year to date, the first 7 or nearly 8 months of the year. We've seen a huge amount of offshore wind capacity awarded by those host governments to various different companies. In absolute terms, as I mentioned, Australia's dominated 2024. We had 27 gigawatts awarded just in that second quarter of the year. But if we look through those lease awards, hopefully what you got from my run around the world was that these awards have been pretty widely spread through Germany, Netherlands, Baltic, Japan, Taiwan, and the US. And so far this year, we've seen 54 gigawatts awarded, which is a huge number. If we look at the numbers in a little bit more detail, we think it's definitely possible that we will reach just above 80 gigawatts in 2024 in total. But we do need to be a little careful with this 80.8 gigawatt number for full year 2024. We do see some risk here. We're less confident in particular on the timing of lease awards in India. And it's very, very heavily weighted towards both Maine and Oregon in the US for that big block that you can see on the Q4 number in the hatched color. So it's certainly a positive backdrop for the volume of awards in terms of gigawatts in 2024. So what do we think will happen next? Are we expecting to see a continuation of that huge release of capacity? And how do we look at certain recent trends around local content, and in particular, the size of individual lease areas that are maybe resonating beyond specific countries and potentially reflecting more widespread trends? So that's the high level perspective. Let's drop down now and take a look at the US. The big news in the last few weeks, beyond the Central Atlantic lease award that I mentioned earlier, was focused in on the US Gulf of Mexico. And here, BOEM cancelled their upcoming lease round due to a lack of interested parties. We were a little surprised, in fact, that round 2 was due to follow on so quickly from round 1, given that developer interest in that first round had been pretty limited to just a few companies. In that first round, only one block was won by RWE, which you can see here on this map in the lighter blue, while 2 blocks were actually not released to developers in that first round. If we then fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, BOEM actually combined the announcement of that cancellation of round 2 due to lack of interest with the news that they were also opening another Gulf of Mexico round, but this time due to an unsolicited application by Hecate Energy, which you can see in that darker blue on the map. So let's have a look at what Hecate's up to. Hecate submitted a new project called Gulf Winds 2 that is for potential 2 gigawatts, that's going to be in 2 blocks that BOEM had previously set aside for the first round. Those 2 blocks were not awarded in that first round. This has the benefit for Hecate that the areas should almost automatically be deemed to be suitable for wind development, and there should be negligible or at least manageable conflict with other sea users. Hecate's been highlighting their plans for wind power to X, and also that combining 2 areas instead of bidding on just one of the areas in the competitive lease round would make the project much more commercially attractive. So they are trying to combine areas into bigger projects. The practice from now on with these unsolicited processes is that BOEM will now allow other companies to submit their own proposals for these areas, If one or more companies shows interest in those areas, then we move towards a competitive lease sale process. However, if no other companies show any interest, then Hecate's in pole position to move forward with the next stages of project permitting. It doesn't mean it will happen, but it means that they move through into the permitting process. The key date that we're watching closely now is the deadline for developers to show any interest, which is September the 12th. And at that point, we will know whether it becomes competitive or not. Looking elsewhere in the US, yesterday or the day before yesterday now, we had an update around the round in Oregon. The EIAs here were passed for both Coos Bay and for Brookings areas. That's the names of the two blocks there. And that means we now seem to be on track for the lease round to conclude later this year. If you'd asked me 3 days ago, I would have said that we were a little uncertain on the timing, but that approval of the EIAs, I think, really pushes it forward and looks like that will happen this year now. And then I also mentioned the award yesterday afternoon, European time anyway, for the award of those two blocks that we saw in Central Atlantic. The reason we highlight those is that the volumes are a bit unclear at the moment, but Boeing was saying they could potentially reach up to 6.3 gigawatts in total, and nothing that we've seen from the developers so far seems to counteract those numbers. So potential 6.3 gigawatts just announced yesterday. So let's move now to Taiwan, where we got news last week confirming the results of the winning developers and the volumes for round 3.2 in Taiwan. Let's be honest, this was not too much of a surprise. We'd already received the provisional results, but it's always good to get the final confirmation of the winners of these processes. So what can we now read into these results? Well, firstly, local developers here were the clear winners. Companies here that we're looking at, such as Sinera and Shinfox. Shinfox may be better known as a new entrant to the installation vessel market, and also Infravest. All three of these companies don't yet have huge experience in getting such large-scale capex projects built. Among the non-Taiwanese companies that won, both CIP and Corio already have significant projects in Taiwan. Ørsted was the big name that missed out here, as despite figuring high up in the initial ranking that we received, their Changhua 3 project overlapped with the Shinfox project and then de facto got relegated from that winning list of projects. Project awards that we're showing here were in declining size of volumes, but even the biggest project that's on offer here is actually relatively small compared to other projects that we see in other jurisdictions. Having said that, presumably the economics of some of these projects will be improved as companies combine these new wins with other projects in their portfolios. Here we're specifically looking at CIP and Corio, for examples. But maybe this is actually also quite positive for some of the new entrant Taiwanese companies who are now able to execute more successfully on smaller scale projects and de-risk these projects somewhat, both operational during that construction phase and also in terms of their financial risk. Key component of this round was the percentage of local content developers were prepared to commit to. Given Sinera and Shinfox's positions across the value chain, whether that's in equipment or vessels, presumably this vertical integration significantly helped their submissions. Local content has definitely not disappeared as a cause for concern in Taiwan. We saw many comments in the run-up to these awards that this was proving to be a real hindrance for developers. We definitely expect the authorities to look at these obligations very closely for future rounds, in particular, given that they're now starting to focus on proposals for the upcoming floating round in Taiwan. Taiwan evidently has no prior experience or existing manufacturing base for executing on floating projects. Let me hand things over to Casper now to follow up with Netherlands and Germany.
Thank you, Oliver. We move over to some key updates from the European markets. Last quarter, we saw the award of the two Dutch sites, IJmuiden Weer Alpha and Beta, with Alpha going to a consortium led by SSE and Beta going to Vattenfall and CIP. There are a couple of takeaways compared to the rounds we saw last year. we're seeing a big drop in the number of bidders taking part, with only 2 bids per site this time around. 4 times that number took part last year, with 8 bids in the mix for Hollandskust West 6 and 7 bids as part of Hollandskust West 7. The low number of bidders may come as a bit of a surprise, being a known market for many developers, with close proximity to supply hubs and demand centers. Those showing interest but opting to sit out the round are citing high interest rates, material cost, and uncertain power markets. The market feedback at the round indicates that for future rounds, the developers are more interested in smaller sites, around 1,000 megawatts, compared to the 2,000 megawatts sites that were offered this time around. And over to Germany. On Monday, we saw 3 sites awarded through the centrally pre-investigated rounds, with RWE securing 4,000 megawatt and Luxcara securing 1,500 megawatt. The German Bundesagentur announced that there were 5 bidders in total for the 3 sites. Compared to last year's pre-central round, the winning financial bid from RWE came in 7 times lower than their average price per megawatt last year. So we're now seeing some developers with deep pockets securing large projects at a comparatively low price. Looking in the context of both the Dutch and German rounds, in addition to some smaller rounds earlier in the Baltics this year, we're seeing some trends of less competition and developers holding back on bidding in the European markets. There can be a long list of reasons for this, like the lack of overall subsidies, costs, load hours on the sites, or time schedule for the project build-outs. But after being successful in rounds last year, it seems like for the time being, a number of developers are more interested in shoring up and developing their existing portfolio of projects in Europe. But we are still seeing high interest from developers in securing the portfolio for more long-term opportunities and projects in newer markets. Like Oliver mentioned, in the Gippsland zone in Australia, we saw at the start of Q2 12 projects awarded to 10 different developers. And over to the last slide, focusing on the pipeline of new awards going forward. After what is said to be quite a busy year in terms of new awarded lease areas, we are currently seeing somewhat lower scheduled activity the next couple of years, as the figure is showing on your screens. Next year is also set to be busy, especially in Europe, but from 2026, we have less visibility on new rounds, especially in the Asian and the US markets. We do expect the pipeline of opportunities to increase. More rounds and areas on offer is in the works in key markets such as Japan, in France, in the UK and the US. We will also see a small shift in the types of projects on offer, with more medium-scale floating project areas for markets such as Greece, Portugal, Italy, and Spain in the mix. And it will be going forward be interesting to see if the trend of low interest in some of these European rounds continue into the next year. And if so, if we'll see some policy adoption in order to sweeten the deal a bit for the developers. There's not expected any more large scale around results in Europe the rest of this year, but the number of new and large rounds and awards is expected in markets such as Denmark, in the Netherlands, Germany, and the UK next year. And with that, I give the word back to Oliver and Ryan.
Perfect. Thank you, Casper. So let's bring today's webinar to a close. There's clearly a huge amount going on in terms of lease rounds and auctions. I just did a very, very quick back of the envelope calculation as Casper was talking. I think it's 11.5 gigawatts that we've seen announced this week. So some big numbers. And we feel that we're now in a really quite key moment. More developed markets often have a pretty clear pathway for when and where blocks will be auctioned. And the key thing for us here is now looking at whether these rounds will get sufficient support from developers. But at the same time, meanwhile, you've got these newer market entry countries that are trying to find their own balance between both volumes and then the terms that they're able to offer to developers. So with that, I will hand things over to you, Ryan.
Excellent. Thank you both, Oliver and Casper. A ton of information in a very, very short period of time. So great work. I do encourage questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please type them into the Q&A section up at the top. But while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I do want to touch on a few additional items. As you see on the screen here, we do have the QR code for the mailing list and our LinkedIn profile. Feel free to click on it and register to be updated on future events. As mentioned in the very beginning, we have recently released our new wind analytics or enhanced wind analytics platform. If you would like a demonstration, more than happy to coordinate, so please reach out to me. I also want to mention that we will be at a number of conferences coming up. Just in about 2 weeks' time, we will be at ONS in southern Norway, and we will have the full team at Hamburg at the end of September. If anyone is attending, please reach out. We would love to coordinate and set up some meetings so we can have that face-to-face interaction and discussions. So please reach out to me for that. I don't see any questions coming through. Let me see. Nothing yet. Lastly, I just want to I just hope that everyone found this to be beneficial. We will have a webinar next month. We have decided that the topic will be Chinese companies in the European market. It should be one that you don't want to miss. I think it'll be extremely, extremely good. So please register when the invite goes out. But thank you all for attending today. Hope it was beneficial, and we will talk soon. Thanks, everyone.